Welcome to The Next Journey, the adventure travel podcast with me, Andrew St. Pierre White. I'm a prisoner of this hill. So what have you been doing with yourself lately? And we must just talk about what we're going to talk about. I mean, there are a couple of things I've got in mind that I think would be quite fun to talk about. One of them was your experiences with Land Rover and the design and development of the Defender, which I think you and I share. That we don't particularly like it because it's too electronic and too complicated and everything. But you have some insight into what actually happened during its development, don't you?
Very, very brief insight. Yeah, the head of, I don't even know what department it was, but basically there was, I think it was like head of Defender development or something, and they had a panel of head of every department, head of engineering, brake, suspension, engine, transmission, interior design, all the rest of it. And they called me up to see a clay model of the external Defender and the internal. The external actually looked really cool. It had more of a sort of a F-150 Raptor look about it. And so it didn't end up looking quite as aggressive when it finally came into production. But the thing that puzzled me the most was the fact that they wanted me to take a whole load of photos with me of pictures of roads from around the world. And what? What? What do you need pictures for, you know? And they said, well, we need to know what this thing's going to be up against. And I said, well, you kind of have been there, haven't you? You have been to Africa and Asia and Mongolia and South America. You've kind of seen what the roads look like that this thing's going to be driving on. And they was, oh yeah, we've been to China. Well, they went to China and just drove around a city on brand new tarmac. So to me, it was baffling. It was like saying to someone, can you build me a boat, please? But at no point did they then ask, well, is it to go on a canal in the UK or to cope with storms of the South Atlantic? You know, it was bewildering. So, yeah, once that meeting came and went, I didn't really have much to do with it. I thought, well, crikey, if that's the levels they're going to have to go to, they don't really know what they're even building and what it has to cope with, then, yeah, you're kind of wasting my time, really. So it's a nice vehicle. If I had the money, I'd buy one. Probably would. But it would be used as a UK, European touring family vehicle. I wouldn't ever take it anywhere remote. That's for certain.
It's interesting that you should say that, because from what I could see when I saw the Defender and looked at it, and I thought the people that had designed it didn't really understand what Defender meant, what the word meant, what it represented.
Yeah.
All they knew was, that was cool. Gee, that was that. When that Defender was that little 90 Land Rover 90 Defender 90, and it had a roof rack, and it looked really cool. And there we should really hang on that heritage, as opposed to that vehicle was incredibly capable. It was basic, simple. We have to make it much better. Of course, we have to make it much better. Not that difficult to make it much better. But we have to make it equally capable and similar in some ways in terms of its job. But that obviously wasn't what they were thinking, and they weren't thinking that way because they were to me targeting people that were buying discoveries.
Yeah,
they were not finding and looking for a new market.
Yeah, I would be very interested to know what the sales figures are for Discovery 5 versus Defender. Because, I entered into the sort of the vehicle expedition world quite late in life. I'd already, my whole career was military and flying, and when that all kind of fell a bit foul, I ended up in Africa and was introduced to the world of adventure and using vehicles to explore remote places. And so I came into it in sort of my mid to late 20s. So I'm not sort of growing up man and boy being an absolute Land Rover diehard enthusiast. But certainly in the mid-80s, early 90s, Land Rover of old, when a lot of the team there were old school, man and boy, they'd been with Land Rover and gone through the whole company from a young apprentice up to sort of a managing to a director or a manager. You felt they really understood what Land Rover was all about. And as far as I could see, there were three divisions. There was utility, Defender, then came family, Discovery, and obviously luxury has been the Range Rover. The problem is, though, now is luxury, 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 and you can't really separate one from the other. And yes, the Defender is, I'm sure, a very capable vehicle, and I've been in one of the Bowler Defenders around a high-speed off-road sort of gravel rally track. Bloody hell, that thing is so fast. But the problem is, though, you can't really differentiate one from the other anymore. And so I would only imagine that, yes, you might have attracted a few more Defender customers, but I would imagine you've taken an awful lot of Discovery customers away, and they're now buying Defenders. Why wouldn't you? It's the same vehicle. It's got a cooler name, and it looks different to all the others. And you can tell your friends it's, a roughy tufty, you can go around the world.
And it makes you look rugged and purposeful, as opposed to a Discovery, or the latest one, looks like you've got an identity crisis, and
it could be a
looks
Kia,
like a Kia,
Audi.
like an ugly Kia. Whereas a Defender, I think, is
absolutely.
a very handsome vehicle.
If you want to be Mr. Adventure,
and
as you're driving into London on some, congested motorway every Monday morning, in your head, you're hacking across Mongolia or, somewhere in Australia or Africa. Why wouldn't you? A bit like the success with the BMW motorbikes after Ewan McGregor and Charlie Borman did their long way round trip. I would imagine every buyer of one of those BMW GSs, in their head, they were just some other part of the world doing their thing. So, yeah.
You're absolutely right. I remember when I was a kid reading early Range Rover reviews, and somebody had written, makes you feel like you're off on a safari, even just going down to the corner shop to get a pint of milk, because the clunk, the roughness, the clatter of the door, the high seating position, the lots of glass, the fact that you were in a four-wheel drive, that was the beginning and the early days of SUV. And the feeling we get of when we do drive down to the shops, we feel nice because we're in a very capable car. And they've taken it to an all new level with Defender, because as far as I'm concerned, it's I've actually called it a catastrophic failure when it comes to an adventure car. That's my own opinion, mind you, because it's so electronic, and if you do simple it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. But as if the business is selling cars, it's been a huge success, which at the end of the day is what they're all about. To keep, it's great building a utility vehicle for the expedition and adventure market, but if only 5 people buy it, your company's going to fold. So yes, on that side, they got it 100% right. And so hats off to them. It was a brave call, cheesed off a lot of people. But I still don't think that Defender has been
it's
not been replaced. That traditional Defender, original Defender, has not been replaced by anybody, including those that have tried recently. I don't think it's been replaced by anybody. And so it's very sad to see, particularly where I am in the West Country, and in fact probably all over the UK, all of those that use vehicles for working are Japanese pickups, and some Fords as well. But it's a lot of Isuzus down here. Is it the D-Max? Is it the pickup? Yeah, lots and lots of those. It would have been Mitsubishis, but they're not in the UK anymore. Navaras, the Ford Rangers, they're very popular, both within the sort of the building community and the farming community. Don't see that too many Toyotas, weirdly. I think it's probably a price issue.
So you were also involved in Grenadier to a degree?
I tried to be. As soon as I heard it was going to be built, obviously I knocked on the door of Grenadier, the same as a lot of other people in my line of business, to say, okay, well, when you finally built this thing, you've got to show the world what it can do. It's all very well telling people you can, it can do this, that, and t'other, but you've got to show them. Otherwise, they're just not going to believe you. So I went knocking on the door. Nothing came of it, unfortunately. But through another agency, I have been doing a bit of work with them. So I have driven it. I have driven it on a very gentle off-road course. I'm in two minds as to what I think of it. Yes, I would love it to have been built in the UK. Again, that would, time will tell whether that was going to have a negative impact on sales. I think the Brits would have been far more behind it in terms of their interest. And I'm sure that, there are a lot of very, very good British automotive specialists. I think, is it all bar one of the Formula One race teams in the on the circuit? I think it's only Ferrari. I think all the others are built, I think even Mercedes, I think they're built in the UK. So, we are absolutely the top of the game when it comes to automotive specialists. So I'm sure some of those could have been used to help build the Grenadier. Would I have liked to have seen a simpler, more basic engine? Absolutely. To take a engine off a high-powered sports saloon car and then try and adapt it for a 4x4 use, I would imagine was quite costly. I'm sure they could have used, I don't know, do Perkins engines still exist? Isuzu engines, Cummins engines, just a bit more agricultural. That's what I would like to have seen. Certainly would have liked to have seen a manual gearbox. I know autos are good, but I've got an auto Shogun and it's been sitting in the garage for weeks now because of sensor problems. The system just does not recognize when it's being put from 2 high to 4 high or 4 high locked. And it's then throwing up another fault, so you have no power. So a simple thing of not being able to select high or low range or 2-wheel drive to 4-wheel drive has now meant that you can barely get the whole car to move. A manual gearbox, it's just going to go in and you're going to find something. You're going to find a gear to keep you moving. So this car is now stuck. So I would imagine, the complexity of automatic gearboxes, I personally would have preferred to see a manual. And then hopefully with maybe a cheaper engine and a cheaper gearbox, and the Recaro seats are lovely, but I think the price is going to be the thing that's going to cause that vehicle trouble, because it's not competing with the Isuzu farm vehicles at 25, 30k. It's competing with new Defender at 60, 65k. And that's going to, if you had that kind of money, you'd probably buy the one with the proper badge on it, the Land Rover Defender badge on it. Even though the Grenadier is probably way more capable when it comes to using it in remote parts of the world. It would have been nice. I don't know what their game plan is in terms of future models, but maybe if they had done like the Tesla model. So the Tesla Roadster came out, very exclusive, only for the rich, but it gets the company started, but always in the hope that eventually you're going to have a Model 2 that's going to cost 20 grand and most people can afford one. So if that is Grenadier's game plan, and they've had to go kind of uber luxury to start with to bring the money in, maybe it would have been nice if they explained that to keep everyone on board that still is desperate for a working utility, cheap vehicle to work the farms and the land and the utilities and all the rest of it. I don't know, though. I don't know.
I actually agree with you completely. I've been very critical of it because it's too fancy, too expensive, and therefore too expensive. But I'm reading Walter Isaacson's book, Elon, which is about Elon Musk. And he quotes Elon Musk saying, if you're going to start a car brand, you start at the top and you work your way down, not the other way around. You don't create a basic vehicle and then try and puff it up. You bring in the Roadster. You bring in something expensive, beautifully made, very chic, very desirable, and then you start bringing models and you start bringing the price down. And I'm actually driving one early in December, Grenadier, to do a review on it, and so I kind of have to swallow my words a little bit. I was very, very critical of the fact that I made it too fancy and too posh and blah, 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 and we wanted something much more basic. But if that's the case, great. But hey, We want to see a more agricultural, lower price, basic vehicle, because I'm a 4x4 enthusiast, and that's what we like.
Yeah.
Because we
Now,
like to choose how we spend our
the
money.
other issue I've also got, and particularly my concern with Land Rover, is that fashions change, opinions change, cultures change. Everything's kind of very, very fluid. So remember, it wasn't that long ago that if you were seen driving a Range Rover through London, you were a baby killer. And blood was being splattered onto the side of vehicles. Why are you, damaging the earth, killing the polar bears because you've got this whopping great 3-ton SUV driving through Chelsea. Now, that may come again. Yes, there's electrification and there's hydrogen and all the rest of it. But the more people become aware of environmental issues, the more people are going to start targeting those brands that are clearly out of touch, because it's not super small and super light and super economical. It's big and ostentatious and it's a gas guzzler. So that could affect sales for your Jaguar, for your Land Rovers and your Discoveries and your Defenders, because they're at the luxury end of the market. They're easy targets. When the weather turns bad, as it just starting to now here in the UK, and we've had 3 successive storms and a lot of flooding, and people are being rescued by old Land Rovers, taking patients to hospitals, running doctors around the countryside, helping clear fallen trees because they can get guys out there with chainsaws. Nobody moans at all about the Land Rovers and the 4x4s. In fact, they're positively praising their presence. So regardless of what happens with, fashion and culture and opinions, workers will always work and farmers will always farm, and they need those vehicles. And I don't think there will be that risk of fluctuation in sales. I think a utility vehicle will always be safe because we always need them. So anyone who can get onto that market with a cheap, basic, solid and reliable utility vehicle, I think will be pretty safe. Okay, they're not going to be huge peaks, as David Beckham drives one and therefore everyone else rushes out to copy him, but it will be solid and dependable, and those will keep the company ticking over. There won't be that risk of it suddenly collapsing as opinions change and all of a sudden you're one of the bad guys in the world because you drive one.
It was, in fact, I remember, it was so bad that, in fact, even a little Panda 4x4 was, you'd have rocks thrown at it because it was purely because it was a four-wheel drive. Because of what forward, as if the decision on which wheels would be driven to propel the car affects its threat to the environment, which is obviously ridiculous. But the word 4x4 was such an anathema to some people, it was absurd. Let's jump from talking about very expensive four-wheel drives. We like to go to remote places. We need a four-wheel drive, but do we? Now, you did a trip not very long ago across China, Mongolia, and you can give me the details, but it wasn't four-wheel drive at all. In fact, it was it wasn't an off-road vehicle at all, and you managed the trip. I'm talking about your van expedition. Tell me about that van expedition.
So I actually went to Vauxhall with a long-distance driving record idea for their Ampera, which was the hybrid, half petrol, half electric. And it was to cross through Eastern Africa, and we were going to go near Cairo. Now, because Vauxhall was owned by GM and the parent division over this part of the world is Europe, it's Opel, it had to all be cleared by them because it was very much more of a sort of a European-African venture than a driving around the UK adventure. Anyway, the Arab Spring kicked off, and even though we would only be driving around sort of Cairo's equivalent of the M25 motorway around London, they were worried that there were going to be kind of riots and all sorts, so they pulled the plug, they got too scared. But at the end of that, they did say, could a van act as a support vehicle for your film crew and your support crew, your mechanics, your medics, and all the rest of it? I said, oh, absolutely. If the car can get through, a van will be no problem at all. And that's kind of the last I heard. A couple of months later, I get a call saying, we met, we talked about this other idea, but we're launching this new van, and we're a bit worried. It's only got a 1.6 litre engine, and the previous model had a 2 litre, and I think the competition, like the Ford Transit, had either a 2.2 or a 2.4 litre engine. So now we're getting into sort of very small, economy car-sized engines in a whopping great 3-ton van. And they were a bit concerned. Your average builder's going to go, well, that ain't going to do anything. So could you come and have a chat with us? Have you got any ideas to demonstrate how tough it is? So off I trot to Luton, where this new Vauxhall Vivaro was being built. And I said, okay, well, what have you guys come up with then? They said, well, we think we could drive a forest track in Scotland, or we could possibly get it to Norway. So I had a little bit of I think we can do a bit better than that. I said, have you ever seen Long Way Round with Ewan McGregor, the motorbike adventure? And a couple of the guys in the meeting did. I said, right, let's do that, but in 3 builders' vans, because that's about as tough as you can get. So the plan was not to start from London, but to start from Europe's most westerly road in Southwest Ireland, a place called Clough Head, where they filmed I think it was an Oscar-winning film, Ryan's Daughter, and another film with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman called Far and Away. It started in Southwest Ireland before I think they jumped on a ship to America, but basically a stunning part of the world. You're right on the edge of the Atlantic, looking out over to Newfoundland, about 1,800 miles west. And then from there, we would just go east until we hit Asia's most easterly road, Magadan, far eastern Siberia. And so that was it. So with a good friend of both of us, Paul Marsh, he came along as one of the mechanics, and we took a Vauxhall mechanic with us because obviously a lot of these vehicles are very, model specific in terms of their technical support. Long gone are the days where you can find a mechanic that knows every vehicle, particularly when it comes to all the sort of the computerized systems. You've got to be a bit of a specialist for a brand new model. We took a small film crew, we took a doctor, and off we went. Now, Vauxhall were big supporters of Help for Heroes, and Help for Heroes is a charity here in the UK that supports injured military veterans, primarily from the Iraq and Afghan campaigns. And they were very keen to raise money for that charity. But at the time, the newspapers had cottoned on that the CEO was paying himself about $250,000 a year. So there's a lot of people doing cake sales and sponsored marathons thinking all their hard work is going to go to money for the troops, whereas in fact it's just allowing him to buy another Range Rover and go on a 3-week holiday to the Maldives. So I said, with all that in the papers, you're not going to raise any money, but let's take some guys with us. And through my military career, it all went a bit wrong, and I hit a bit of a downer. And it was a banger rally across the Sahara Desert that was a massive reality check to me and got me back on my feet again, because as my mates were Harrier pilots, Red Arrows pilots, Spitfire display pilots, mine, unfortunately, went in completely the opposite direction. And it was that banger rally, getting an old Rover 200 across the Sahara through Tunisia, Algeria, Niger, Benin, was a massive wake-up call that, yes, I'm not a fighter pilot and I don't drive a BMW, but life is not that bad compared to the people you see in places like Niger. So I said, I know that such an adventure will help veterans. Let's take some with us. Let's change some lives, not just, raise a couple of £100. Now, we didn't have time to modify the vehicles to make them adapted for physical disabilities. So we then chose guys that were suffering from PTSD. So one guy from Gulf War one from Gulf War II, and one of the girls, or a girl on the team, she'd done 2 tours of Afghan as a combat medic. So her job was to fly out with the Chinook helicopters, grab these guys in the back and keep them alive until getting them into theatre. So every day she was seeing the most horrific injuries, mainly through IEDs, improvised explosive devices. So a lot of lower leg injuries. And absolutely turned their lives around. And we have followed on that program of helping veterans through challenging vehicle adventures. They say that travel broadens the mind. I really believe it can help heal the mind as well.
Fascinating. How long did the trip actually take, and what was the distance?
Well, we had to set ourselves something of a challenge, to feel that we'd achieved something. We couldn't just go on sort of a wishy-washy holiday. So it was 12,000 miles, 20 countries, and we gave ourselves 60 days. So that's averaging about 200 miles a day, which doesn't sound much. You think, well, crikey, that's easy. However,
No,
when you're
actually,
going, when you're going through Mongolia and you're barely out of second gear or third gear, and you're going to doing the road of bones, and again you're crawling along, 200 miles is quite a tiring pace. And I think we only had, we got stuck. So the route took us, once we'd sort of done a bit of a tour around sort of the British Isles, Southern Ireland, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and then back to Luton in England for a bit of a send-off at the factory. Then it was a bit of a high-speed run to Istanbul. So that was 1,800 miles in just 4 days, because it wasn't, European motorways weren't going to test the vehicle at all. And we were filming it for a European-wide TV advertising campaign. So that was of little or no interest in terms of any film footage. So we hightailed it across to Istanbul. And then even running across the northern end of Turkey, following the shores of the Black Sea, even that was pretty good roads. It wasn't until we got into Georgia and Azerbaijan that things slowed down a bit. You then take a ferry from Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan, to, I think it's called Turkmenbashi in Turkmenistan, which is a police state. So that took a lot of permission to try and even be allowed into there. And we had to have a guide with us thereafter, mainly for language issues, really. Although there are ferries, there are no car ferries as such. You just kind of turn up and try and find a boat to get on. And a lot of them are taking trains across from one side of the Caspian Sea to the other. So we got held there for, I think, 2 days. So it did give us a bit of a rest time, purely because we just couldn't find a ferry that was available to throw us on board and fit in amongst, trucks or train carriages or what have you. And then across Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and then it looks like Kazakhstan and Mongolia meet, but they don't. Russia and China meet. So you either have to go into China and out, or into Russia and out. And it's a lot easier to go into Russia, or it was then anyway, to go into Russia. So a bit in and out into Russia, and then entering Mongolia from its most westerly point, all the way through the middle to Ulaanbaatar, up to Lake Baikal, across we're basically running the Trans-Siberian Highway, which runs very close to the Trans-Siberian Railway, and then up the Lena Highway to Yakutsk, where I'd been before on an extreme driving series with Tom Hardy, but we did that in the winter, so that got down to -60 in the winter. It was a nice bit warmer when we went up there. I think it was like July, August when we did it with the vans. So up to Yakutsk, the coldest city, and then following the Road of Bones all the way to Magadan. So we set ourselves 60 days. And within that, apart from I think 2 days or one day waiting for the ferry, there was a day in Kazakhstan to do a servicing on the vehicle, and a day in Yakutsk. I think we only had 3, possibly 4 days off. So it was quite intensive, but it just kept the pace going. And for the veterans, they didn't have 5 minutes to think about their problems before, over a hill, my God, look at that view, or wow, what's this food, or where are we sleeping, or the people you meet, or absolutely transformed them.
From their point of view, what about it was actually transformed them? Because obviously, you're right, at the time, it's all exciting, it's all new, it's all fresh, and they've got challenges that they've got to deal with. But on the long term, when they got home and had to go back to their lives, how do you think it had changed their mental state?
There's always going to be a downer. The explorer John Blashford Snell from the Darien Gap Range Rover expedition of whenever it was, the 1970s, was it 72 or something? He's always described it as post-expedition blues.
72, yes.
Yeah, you come home and nobody really understands what you've been through, apart from those that were there. So you try and talk to, wives or partners or business colleagues or family. And if they're not the sort of people that do this kind of thing, it just straight over their head. To them, it's like you've just, popped down to Tesco's to buy a pint of milk. So you do need to stay in touch with those people. You want to talk about it, and then you get home and no one's really interested, and then that kind of gets frustrating because you want to share it. So you do need to carry on talking with them. But I think what it was is for a lot of them, and certainly veterans that we've taken subsequently on trips around the UK, nothing too challenging, and a bit more challenging when we did the Dakar route through the Moroccan Sahara in 300 quid Citroen Berlingo's, sort of thing that postmen drive around this part of the world. A lot of them had been very housebound. I know when I was having problems, I kind of withdrew into myself. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I'm ex-army as well as ex-air force. I'm 6'2", big strapping lad, ex-military. I don't talk about sort of personal mental health problems. So you don't want to talk about it, and if you show it in your face, people will say, "Oh, how are you doing? You're right," and then you don't want to talk about that. You don't want them to know, so you do tend to withdraw into yourself. And we found a lot of the veterans had got to the stage where they literally couldn't leave the front door, and they couldn't talk to anybody, and they couldn't talk to people that they had maybe served with or knew they'd been in the military, just basically probably because of the embarrassment of it all. And also, it would have been bringing up kind of, fairly fresh wounds in terms of the imagery that they had going through their head. So with a lot of them, it takes quite a lot for them to leave that very insular world that they're living in and get them back out there to meet people, to undertake challenges, to go on adventures. And it's got to take something quite big. I know the guys that we took to the Sahara, a lot of them were well known within the military charities of really struggling, suicidal attempts and all the rest of it. So the charities were keeping a close eye on them and offering them activities, go and do some horse riding, or go on an day doing some archery, or go on a trek over the hills. But there was nothing that was a big enough draw to get them out the house and put themselves back in that situation of being amongst other people again. And so I think once, because of the nature of the trips we've done and just the sheer excitement of vehicle based, we try and make it quite military in its way. So even with the Vauxhall project, everyone has a uniform. The vehicles are branded all pretty much the same. There's definitely a sort of a military look and feel about it. And I like to run those trips with very much a sort of a military air to the whole thing. And even, for example, when we did Driven to Extremes, and we had Tom Hardy in Siberia, Henry Cavill, who plays Superman in the desert of Western China, and then Adrian Brody, the youngest Oscarin, in the Malaysian jungle. Even then, there was very much this military feel. And a lot of the guys like Paul Marsh, the medic, our security guys, were all ex-military anyway, so it came quite naturally. But one of the guys, who dreamt up the whole series, he was the global creative director for one of the biggest aid agencies in the world. Because of his kind of status amongst the team and just his air about him, he quickly got nicknamed the Brigadier, Brigadier Shelbourne, and I still refer to him as the Brig. And so if anyone did anything wrong in the jungle, it's right, down and do 10 press-ups. I don't care who you are, kind of thing. And so it was all done very tongue-in-cheek, all the rest of it. But I think the veterans kind of felt comfortable with that. Yeah. It was familiar to them. And the other thing was there were other guys and girls there that were struggling. But at no point did we, lay down a couch and with a pillow and have a doctor there saying, well, tell me about your problems. Because they've done all that. They've done that more than they ever want to do it. They just want to be treated like normal human beings again. And so we had a doctor, and we've always carried a doctor on our teams. But that's for A&E. That's, car crash. That's for, proper injuries. It's not for counselling. We don't do any of that. And they all get given a role, because you can't, wet nurse people and just have them as dead weight. They all have skills. So make use of those skills, get them working as part of the team. And I think that gave them a massive kick or a massive boost or a leg up, whatever you want to describe it, so that when they came home, they felt, I've done this, I've got back out there again, I am of use to society, I can hold my head up high, it's nothing to be ashamed of. And I think it just gave them that lift to then carry on and slowly getting better.
Amazing. It's a great story. I can imagine. I can imagine it can be would be very, very rewarding, seeing people like that who are suffering like that suddenly come out of their shells and become normal again. I imagine you actually just see it in front of your eyes. You see them
Yeah.
change from day one to day two, and it must be fantastic.
It's very emotional, and it, even watching the videos now of the short films we've made of those trips, it does it still brings me to tears now. So yeah, I'm quite proud of it, and I'm very proud of the guys and girls that took part.
Are they on YouTube? Are they available for people to watch?
Yes, our YouTube channel is Driven to Extremes. There's about 80 odd videos on there. There's all of the stuff that we did with Tom Hardy and co. There's some stuff from I
Okay.
think my trip with Sir Ranulph Fiennes to the North Pole. Some BBC ITV news footage might be on there. The stuff I did with Ranulph Fiennes on the edge of the Bering Straits with these tracked amphibious defenders, that's on there. So yeah, have a and the videos.
Okay.
The playlist with the veterans is called Road to Recovery. So have a nose around and have a look.
I shall do. What do you, Mac? You've always puzzled me because what do you actually do for a living? I know you're very passionate about certain things, but what is your? I mean, you offer this service, but there's more to it. What do you do for a living? Every day when you're busy, what do you do?
The proper money earners I would refer to as brand marketing through adventure. So that has been the project for Vauxhall, the one for
Right.
Shell. We beat the London to Cape Town record. That was for Texaco or Chevron. We've done stuff with Kia, with electric cars. So that's kind of how I earn a proper day's wage. By living within my means, it means that you have these, if you can imagine, taking Hollywood film stars and FX Formula One racing drivers to remote parts of the world where it's minus 60 and a big film crew for a global TV series on Discovery Channel, you get paid quite well for it because you've got to keep those people alive. If
Yes.
Tom Hardy's worth an awful lot
Yes.
of money to Hollywood. So, they're not going to, a couple of trips to Morocco is not going to qualify you for looking after him in such extreme parts of the world. So that's kind of the big money earner. And then
Right.
that kind of allows me to have relatively big gaps between those projects.
And then you do a passion project.
There's a company called Ferring. It's not secret. It's within the public domain. So I am part of that team, and in fact I'm up there tomorrow. As you can see, I've busted my hand. But I was doing quite a lot of work with them. So it's this new super lightweight hybrid expedition vehicle. Now that's how it started life. However, because it has an incredibly long range, we're talking thousands of miles of range, it's super efficient, it has a very high payload, incredible off-road capability, and it has 50 miles of silent running, i.e. battery only. The military from around the world have expressed a lot of great interest in it. And so that is, I'm doing a lot of work for them at the moment. The vehicle, the first ones are just coming off the production line. And my main role is I'm the chief test driver. So won't be for a while, but I will be getting to drive that. But the mule, as we called it, was built during COVID, during lockdown, from bits of stuff the designer could find off eBay and B&Q, which is like a sort of a DIY store where you get your sheet metal and your screws and your nuts and bolts and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And I have driven this on
Bunnings.
some pretty severe off-road terrain with a Defender 110 following with center diff lock and traction control all round. This thing was running rear-wheel drive only with no axle diff lock, and it didn't even notice it. The Defender was floundering within about 10 feet. But the Ferring, the Pioneer, it does run truck tyres. It's got Unimog axles, hubs, I would say. So
Okay.
its ground
Yep.
clearance,
Portal hubs.
I think, is the same as a new Defender's wading depth. You know, it's like a meter. It's ridiculous.
700 millimeters, I think.
Yeah,
It might be a
yeah.
meter. A
It's
meter.
it's
A
700 or
meter.
800.
Yeah, okay. So that
Yeah,
much.
yeah.
That's,
Maybe it's
yeah,
800 on the new Defender. Yeah, but
yeah,
that's the
yeah,
ground clearance of this vehicle. It's
yeah,
absolutely
yeah.
bonkers. It weighs 1.5 tons,
But it's,
and it can carry 1.5 tons. Yeah.
is that
So
all?
that's not bad. You know, what can the Grenadier carry? 750 kilograms, 800, something like that, is it?
Yeah, it's about 800. But now I'm really interested in this vehicle. Will it ever be sold to? Is it just military, or will it be sold to the
Like,
public?
yeah. That is the plan. Yeah, but a bit like the Tesla story, and I'm hoping the Grenadier story. You've got to start with the top end expensive ones to get money in the kitty, to then allow you to produce a bog basic utility version. It's not going to be a cheap vehicle just by the nature of what it is, but um, I would imagine it will probably get down to top end Defender money eventually.
Well, keep me in the keep me in mind when they want to do some good PR stuff in
Yeah,
Australia or Africa. I'm your
yeah. Well,
man.
look up.
Okay.
I think it's Fering.com, Fering. I think it's .com now. Fering Technologies. Yeah, so it's all on the website. You can see it. The designer Ben, he was one of the original six-man design team for the McLaren F1 road car, the one with the centre steer under Gordon Murray. So there were only six guys designing that, and he was one of them. Then he
Yes.
went on to work with Ferrari. He designed the BMW Le Mans winning race car, and it was basically a Formula One racing car for the road called the Caparo T1 that Jeremy Clarkson drove on Top Gear. It was like this purple winged, monstrously fast car, and most hypercars would get to the top of the sort of the lap time board by beating the previous Bugatti or whatever by point something of a second or half a second. This thing 10 seconds I think quicker than any car that ever been around there. It was mental, but unfortunately because of there's always money people behind it, they kind of forced it to come to market too soon, so it wasn't quite ready. They had a few teething troubles and therefore the sales were not brilliant. So this is a much more different approach. This is, proper testing. But because lightweight is his key, this thing doesn't even have a metal bodywork. It's fabric. It's tent material off a scout tent, basically. Super lightweight.
Incredibly jealous. It was many years ago. I did some test driving for Mitsubishi in South Africa, and it was about the most fun you can have in a vehicle because they would literally say, "Okay, go over there." So you go over there. So they mount the cameras and they say, "Come towards it," and they go faster, go faster, and go faster. Until eventually I said to them, "Look, something is about to break because this vehicle is. We don't care." Even faster. So fine, not my car. And it was so much fun. It was absolutely. And then they had a whole press thing, and they said, "Andrew, you need to drive around the corner and do this thing up there and come down and come around here." So I went like a bat out of hell, and right near the end, where there was all this press, she twitched and the back came right out. And I turned and I pushed power and I came around this corner like Ari Vatanen. I've never done it before and I've never done it since, but it was magnificent. And like this. And I'm there kind of, it was nothing. It was nothing. And my heart's going, best fun in the world. So I'm very jealous.
No, I've got a lot of. The frustrating thing is I've got so many ideas swirling around my head, particularly those that were canned with Land Rover, Jag, Aston Martin, all the rest of them. Yeah, a lot of the time it's trying to encourage companies to part with their hard-earned money But the projects we've done for Vauxhall and
Yeah.
Shell were award winning. They absolutely loved it. They got
Yeah.
millions of
Yeah.
eyeballs on their brand or their product. So it would be nice if a few more
Absolutely. Absolutely.
manufacturers,
Yeah.
stepped up. And I'm quite fortunate working with Kia. I'd been badgering electric car manufacturers for a long time, saying, "Look, you need to be doing way more than what you are. You're only telling half the story. You're giving the range story. You're not really giving the recharging story." I don't know if you can see behind me here. There's some old posters or sort of adverts from car magazines. So this was Ford, the launch of the Ford Cortina in 1963. So for anyone, 1960s cars weren't that reliable. Brakes were, maybe new technology in terms of what they were moving from drums to discs or what have you. Gearboxes were never that good, and so people would be quite hesitant. I live in the home county surrounding London. I've got to commute 12 miles into work, but Granny lives in Scotland. I might have to go and see her once a year. Will it make it? Will it make Scotland? Will it do 400 miles? So what do Ford do? They beat the London to Cape Town record. 10,000 miles, 13 days. What are you worried about? And I've been saying to EV manufacturers, you need to do the same sort of stuff. Because if you don't, people are going to be quite hesitant of this new technology, particularly the how long does it take to recharge. You probably can't see it with a camera shot, but I've got another one. If I could probably show you here, if I take it off the wall, that one there. So that's Sterling Moss as a PR stunt to promote the newly launched Humber Super Snipe in 1952. And the boss of Humber, he wouldn't waste money on car adverts. He said, waste of time. People buy the newspapers and the magazines for the stories, not for the adverts. Let's give them some good stories. So it was a two-pronged attack to promote the launch of that car. Sterling Moss and 3 of his racing chums were challenged to visit 15 countries of Europe in less than 5 days, starting in Oslo, Norway, going all the way out to what was Yugoslavia, and then down to Lisbon. He actually did it in 3.5, through the winter, over Alpine passes, where there were ferries, not bridges, and where borders would close and you actually had proper border control. And at the same time, almost on the same day, a guy called George Hinchliffe, who had beaten the London to Cape Town record in January of 1952, was given a Hillman Minx and said, can you beat your own record? And off he went. And I think he knocked something like 7 or 8 days off the record, getting it down to 13 days, 8 hours. And when Eric Jackson came along in the Ford Cortina, some 11 years later, he only beat that record by 18 minutes. And of course, there are stories everywhere about this car racing around Europe, hacking across the Sahara. You're not going to have any doubt in your mind that vehicle is tough and capable and it's worth investing your money in. So it took a long time before Kia were the first to put their head above the parapet and say, okay, could you, as I'd put to them, could we match the record, well, not the record time. The original idea I went to Kia was, could you do in an EV now 15 countries in less than 5 days, 3,600 miles with an electric car? So, that's quite a tall order. We actually beat Sterling Moss's time by 47 minutes. So we did over 1,200 miles a day in an EV. Now, for most people, when you're talking EVs, they're thinking, well, you can do 200, 300 miles, and that's kind of it. But that's the problem if you don't build in the EV rapid charging technology story and actually using it, because of course it's all against the clock. It's all very well doing 300 miles, but if you've got to charge it for 8 hours, you're screwed. You've got to charge that thing in less than 20 minutes. And I think because we did a lot of fanning around, filming and photographing, and we did a lap of Monaco, because why not? We were there. We probably could have knocked another 12 hours off it quite easily. So I've got some long distance EV stuff I want to do, but it's all down to cash. I've got the cars, Kia are on board, but it's the hard cash needed to make it happen. But watch this space.
Well, I've said to you before, I've got a global audience and they love this kind of stuff. And so if you're looking at a project and you need some media feel free to say, hey, I've got this idea. Will it fit with your audience? Because if you can go I might be wrong, but if you can go and say, this is my idea, and by the way, I can reach straight away. I can reach 400,000 people straight away. So how about if you can say that, it immediately gets them saying, okay, where are these people? What kind of people are they? Well, they're male and they're about, average between 30 and 55 years old, and they're in the following countries. And if you say that to them, they'll say, okay, well, that sounds like a good start. You can give us that. Yeah, we'll do the project and I can give you that audience. So where else are we going to get an audience from? And so in other words, it's a good starting point. So never forget that I love this kind of stuff.
Brilliant.
And I've got a big audience, so keep me in mind if you've got something.
Absolutely, yeah. It
doesn't have to be four-wheel drive. It has to be adventure with motoring and cars. That's all it has to be. It doesn't have to be four-wheel drive. As long as we're going to interesting places and we're pushing some vehicles, and you never know what happens. And if you've got a good story, you're absolutely right. I read the motoring press and I don't really read it because I'll scan the motoring press because I know that, certain websites and certain YouTube channels, they're just paid advertorial. So I'll scan a review, and I think so many people are the same. They'll scan a review and they won't take it too seriously. But when there's a good story behind a car, behind a vehicle, behind a product, then people lean forward and go, wow, I'm just listening to you 1,200 miles a day in an electric car. Never thought it was possible until you told me now.
No, you're absolutely right.
Stories.
I was invited to, and what was it? I think it was the G4 Challenge, but I was a reporter for Land Rover Monthly. So, global terms, a completely unknown publication with a relatively small, readership numbers. But I get invited through LRM to go and be the reporter for the G4 Challenge. Oh my God, I was treated like royalty. I had my own private driver. I had my own private Range Rover. I was living in basically a castle in this room that was bigger than my house. I was sitting next to the marketing director, being fed with the best food and as much drink as I could get down my face. My goodie bag was, fleeces and jackets and this and that. And I think, bloody hell, what do they do for, the editor of some, national newspaper? Or, what would Jeremy Clarkson get? And you're right. I guess you just got to be quite careful with what you read, because being a motoring journalist, if you love travel and you want to go to exotic parts of the world and be treated like royalty, become a motoring journalist, because the manufacturers will just keep throwing that at you all the time. But I guess you've just got to toe the line, and write really praising things about their products. And I would imagine there's very few journalists that have the power to actually say what they really think without it affecting them financially. And I can only imagine the likes of Jeremy Clarkson are probably one of the few who could actually say, I think it's a load of rubbish, and I'll tell you it's a load of rubbish, and this is my reason. And it won't affect him at all. If it was a journalist or even the editor of a magazine, they would lose advertising revenue. They would, they wouldn't be invited to these do's, and therefore they've got less material to now write about because they're not being present, and their competitors get the exclusive on some new Audi whatever being launched. So it's kind of a shame, really, but you kind of see why they do it. And I'm sure it's across the board with all business. It doesn't matter what you're reporting on. I'm sure it's always the way. But then it does mean that the consumer never really gets an absolute honest. And I know that you must be also one of the few, and it must have stung you quite badly over the years. But on the other hand, hats off to you. People will watch your channel and they actually know what they're going to invest their hard cash into. So yeah.
I decided earlier on that if I couldn't say what I thought, then I just don't want to do this. And a quick anecdote: I wrote a review of a trailer. It was a caravan, and I saw they came. It was they showed it to me, and I said, "It's a great idea, concept fantastic. You've made a mistake." And they said, "What?" And I said, "You've used a Rubex axle." 3 off-road trailer manufacturers before you have used that Rubix axle and it has failed and it has cost them, and one of the companies actually closed down because of it. So many failures. So I think it's probably a bad idea. They said, oh, no. And I said, look, I'm not blowing smoke. You know me. I'm not going to blow smoke. That's my opinion. I then wrote an article about the product in my book. And I said, that axle spells disaster. They have put a 1.8 ton version of it in, but still, in my opinion, be careful. Getaway Magazine got a phone call from their deputy editor. I think she was one of the junior editors, but anyway, one of the writers there. And she said, Andrew, what do you know about this trailer? Oh, yeah, no, well, I said to her, the axle broke, didn't it? She said, why, how do you know? I said, well, it's bound to break soon. So you broke it? Yeah. And I said, so basically the wheel, flew up and got wedged in the wheel arch. How did you know? And I said, well, it was written on the wall. She wrote the article. It was a Getaway Magazine article. She wrote the article and she said the axle had failed and described it. I wrote in my book, and they came out at about the same time, be careful of that axle. I got a letter from the CEO of that trailer company saying, we're taking you to court. They threatened with a whole lot of things. And I said, go for it, because I'm quite careful. In my opinion, I regard it as, those are the kind of words I use. I won't say it as a fact, but the following edition of that monthly magazine, there was the same letter that I had received from, because in my letter it said, please print the following. Glowing, fantastic, wonderful caravan trailer. And they had printed it verbatim, same as my letter, because the magazine then, with that same edition, had a back cover and had closed a contract with CI Caravans. But they had to retreat and say, oh no, it was the journalist's fault.
Yeah.
And I said, well, take me to court. Go for it. So that was what happened in a reputable magazine. An honest journalist trying to be honest in a reputable magazine. It can't happen because the advertising, the revenue was significant that they would have lost. The court case wasn't the issue. I never heard another thing. So I like to be honest. Otherwise, what's the point? And I've managed to grow an audience that respect what I say. But I don't get invited to those lovely dinners that you have just described anymore. I used to, but don't anymore.
Yeah. One of my biggest disappointments actually is with the Royal Geographical Society. And for all those that don't know, it's the oldest explorers club in the world. So, Livingstone, Scott of the Antarctic, Edmund Hillary, a lot of the pioneering expeditions during Victorian time would have been dreamt up, sponsored and started from the Royal Geographical Society in London. And I was introduced to them because, like I say, I came into this sort of expedition 4x4 world quite late. So I was introduced to them by Land Rover. I had been part of this 6-man team with Ranulph Fiennes for Land Rover's 50th anniversary, London, New York, Bering Straits, tracked amphibious defenders. And so I went down to be introduced to them by the PR manager at the time. And I was Land Rover's number 2 man for expeditions, and obviously Ranulph Fiennes being number 1. So from there followed a close relationship of me guiding, advising, mentoring members of the RGS. A lot of them are, university students that want to go off and explore, prepare vehicles and go off and travel and what have you. But one of the events they did, and they still do every year about this time, is called the Explore Weekend. So basically those that want to do it will be advised by those that have done it. It doesn't matter whether you want to climb Everest, you want to go and study bats in the Malaysian jungle, you want to sail across the ocean, trek across a desert. Somebody somewhere will have done something similar or know somebody, and they can advise and guide you as to how to progress with your plans. A lot of it research-based, but a lot of it could just be pure adventure, go out and see the world kind of thing. So I used to chair the vehicle expedition panel, and I would bring in 4, 5, 6 other specialists who had got experience of driving different vehicles. It wasn't just Land Rovers. There were, trucks, there were small cars, there were motorbikes. And we would have 50 or 60 delegates sitting there and being able to go firsthand and ask questions concerning them as to, all matters from paperwork to vehicle choice to, how do you go to the loo when it's minus 30? It didn't really matter what it was. And so I would give an introduction because obviously you've got to explain to the delegates why you reassure them that you are speaking from some position of authority or experience, and introduce the panel in front of them. And so, of course, I had some film of the Siberia trip with Tom Hardy, and there's 2 Nissan patrols racing across the Siberian wilderness in, it didn't look particularly challenging underfoot, but at minus 60, everything works completely different. A bungee will stretch and stay there, belts will snap, plastics will shatter, tiles will just rip and rupture. So you do need a very solid vehicle to be able to cope with the cold environment, not just, how undulating it looks underfoot. And one of the delegates said to me, "Why did you use Nissan patrols?" And I was very honest. I said, the project was for Shell, and they gave me a choice of 5 vehicle manufacturers I could work with. Toyota was not on the list. Toyota would have been on the list. It would have been either I think it would have been an 80 or 100 series, or probably 105 series at the time, I think. This was in 2012. Or, so either a 70 or a 105. They would have been my choice, but they weren't on the list, so I couldn't consider them. What was on the list was Ferrari, because of Shell's association with F1. Well, that ain't going to do anything. Hyundai, again, no plug-in SU 4x4. Audi, still nothing. Jeep, okay, you're getting a little bit warmer, particularly with the military Wranglers. I think it's called the J8. Land Rover with the original old-shaped Defender, but it was running I think in 2012, it would have been, the 2.4 litre Ford Transit engine, and the Nissan Patrol. Nissan. Yeah. So they were my 5. Immediately, it had to be Nissan. As far as I could tell, if you can't have Toyota, that was your number 2. But it had to be the one the aid agencies use. The 4.2, straight 6, normally aspirated, not one ECU to be seen anywhere. Everything is mechanical. And they said, "Why didn't you use Defender?" I said, "It wouldn't make it. I'm really sorry, but it's too complex. And at minus 60, you cannot mess around on a PR exercise. If those vehicles break at minus 60, although you've got the best kit in the world, you are hundreds of miles from anywhere. Life expectancy is now measured in minutes and hours. Once that engine stops and you're stranded, it's getting very serious very, very quickly. And so I could not put my hand on my heart and stand up in a court of law and say, by using the Defender, that I had chosen, from my experience, the best vehicle for that environment. I couldn't do it. So that's why I went down the Nissan route. And so I was 100% honest. I said, look, if you're going to Africa, if you get an old 300 TDI or maybe a TD5, the environment is not minus 60. You're not going to drop dead within an hour. And you're not going to suffer from frostbite within, 1 or 2 minutes. That's incapacitating. I've got a knackered hand here. And it's amazing when you can't use one hand, just how immobile you are. You can't put on a jacket, you can't open a door, you can't, pour a cup of hot drink. So can you imagine with frostbite at minus 60 where both hands have gone, you're just sitting there waiting to die. There's literally nothing you can do. Anyway, the weekend went well. We had all the maps out. We were helping all these people. Time goes on. I phone up about 2 or 3 weeks in advance of the following year's Explore weekend to the lady who organised it. Hiya, it's Mac, blah, blah, blah. What do you want me to do this year? I can come help and set up chairs and make tea in advance and get the room ready. And the first thing she said to me was, "You have caused me a year of untold grief." I think grief was the word she used. And I went, whoa, what's happened? And then, of course, this whole thing about me basically saying that we'd use Nissan patrols and that the Land Rover Defender was not capable of operating in that environment. Turned out that there was a PR girl from Land Rover sitting in the audience, unbeknown to me, reported it back to her superiors, reported it back to the RGS, who are sponsored quite heavily by Land Rover. And I said, look, it's not a game here. These people are spending quite, not an insubstantial amount of money to come to this weekend. Plus they got the travel. Plus, because it's a 2-day thing, they've got to stay overnight in London. You're talking 500 quid minimum, probably, to come and attend this weekend. They're there to listen to experts in whatever the field it is, that they're going to be given honest, impartial, and professional advice. I'm not going to tell people to go out and buy a £40,000 new old-shaped Defender and drive it somewhere where, at best, they're going to get into trouble, and at worst, it could cost them their lives. And that was it. Me and the RGS parted ways, which is such a shame because I've done that for 20 years, and I've basically nothing happened since. It's been 5, 6, 7 years now or so. But I did say to the lady who organised the event, so what happens if you were sponsored by some cheap Chinese parachuting company or some, cheap Malaysian climbing rope company? Are you going to be pushing that for your young, students to be hanging off rock faces or jumping out of aircraft with stuff that is not going to work? Of course you're not. So don't do it with 4x4s either, because it's just as serious and the consequences can be equally as catastrophic. So yeah, I was very disappointed actually that was the stand they took. So all down to money again, a bit like the advertising. So yeah, be careful who you listen to. I think that is the advice.
Mac, it's been great. It's been great catching up. Thank you for your time. Really, really do appreciate it. Hope your hand gets better so you can go back and drive such an interesting vehicle. I'm going to go straight onto the internet now and have a look at it.
Brilliant. Well, very, very happy to chat further and part any more words of wisdom. And there's obviously a lot more adventures I've been on. So mainly vehicle based. That's my true passion.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, fantastic. All right. Brilliant, Mac. Again, thank you. And we'll talk again. Thank you so much for listening to the Next Adventure podcast with me, Andrew St. Pierre White. To find out more information, check out thenextjourney.net. Join us each Sunday